Hi, my name is Allison Tristo, and I'm the Community Field Representative at Western United Dairies. Today we have Tessa Fall on the podcast, and she manages their family business, Curtimade Dairy, in Tulare County. We also have on the CEO of Wood, Anya Rodabaugh, and the Director of Environmental Services, Paul Souza. And they're all going to discuss the litigation that the Curtis just settled. So let's get into it.
Pacific Gas and Electric is here to remind you that signs keep you safe. Sections of our natural gas transmission pipeline travel underground and beneath agricultural land. For the safety of you, your family, and your employees, pipeline markers are placed to indicate the approximate location of the pipe as a reminder to use extra care. Removing a pipeline marker creates a serious safety hazard. To have additional markers placed or report damaged or missing markers, please call your PG&E account manager or our agricultural customer service center at 877-311-3276. To learn more, visit www.pge.com/agsafety. Remember, signs keep you safe.
Yosemite Farm Credit is the farmer's choice for agriculture financing. As a farmer-owned cooperative, we are dedicated to serving our neighbors in the agriculture community with financial products and services tailored to your operation and backed with a relationship you can trust. Whether you're purchasing real estate, making improvements to the dairy, or wanting to purchase or lease equipment, we're here to help our members prosper. Visit our website at YosemiteFarmCredit.com to find a branch location nearest you.
Oh, why don't you tell us about RCRA, which was the original premise of the Curtimade lawsuit, Curtimade versus the city of Corcoran?
Yeah, sure. So RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, was passed in 1976 to deal with solid waste, so garbage and landfills. Manure was specifically excluded from RCRA. It was not to cover manure. However, preceding the issue that we had here in California with the Curtimade dairy, there was a lawsuit that was settled in Washington State with an environmental group and a group of dairies that didn't go well. And in that case, the environmental group got a judge to kind of backpedal on the manure issue. I was reading some things, and where the decision they came to was that manure applied in excess of what is needed by the crop, at agronomic rates, if you apply in excess of that, that is a waste and a disposal, and that RCRA does apply to that manure. So that was novel. That had never been done before. And so with that new piece of information and precedent in Washington State is where this case really was allowed to come from. And I remember seeing sometimes the attorneys out of Washington State then put on trainings for other attorneys, how to extort your local dairy based on this case that was that they won in Washington State. And so that really spread, this RCRA issue gave attorneys a new weapon to go after dairies with this kind of twist. And so that was, prior to anything happening in California, and what really set the stage for what we saw in California that we're going to talk about in this podcast.
Yeah, so that brings us to the interview that all of our listeners are about to hear. In 2015, the city of Corcoran decided to file a RCRA, which Paul just finished summarizing, lawsuit against the Curtimade dairy, which farms and dairies somewhat proximally located to the city of Corcoran. And the allegation was that because concentrated animal feeding operations such as Curtimade theoretically generate, handle, and store manure and or dispose of it in large volumes, that they would be a source of automatic groundwater contamination. And so the RCRA litigation, I would say, turned into a much harder case to make because, as you will hear, there was no evidence that essentially linked any of the wells in question to a nitrate violation. So unfortunately, the story you're about to hear and go through with the Curti dairy really became an issue of money And it was ultimately an extortion campaign out of a neighboring dairy that simply existed next to a municipal operation. So enjoy this story. It's got a good ending, but we hope our members really take for it what it's worth. Be on your guard. Paul has wonderful suggestions about how to potentially avoid this, but the issue of RCRA will unfortunately linger in and around the dairy industry probably for some number of decades at this point. Well, welcome, Tessa. You've got myself, Anya Radaba, and Paul Souza with you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the long saga that you and your family have had to go through against the city of Corcoran. And so thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to see you guys and familiar faces at Western United. So it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, with some good news, too. A lot of our members have been, I think, really pulling for you and your dad and your whole family, hoping that you stayed strong through the fight. We certainly know it wasn't easy, and that you did a bulk of all of the legal research yourself to try to keep the costs down. So I know our members will be happy to hear that the lawsuit is now settled. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Almost 8 years to the exact day, ironically. So
the long and awful process. But can you kind of just, go through and talk about the day that you received this notice from the city of Corcoran almost 8 years ago that the municipality was going to sue your family?
Sure. So that was, we're completely blindsided. We did not know anything was coming in that regard. We had not been approached or had any discussion with anyone from the city or otherwise in regards to any contamination issues or nitrate in their wells or anything like that. So we weren't expecting anything. And we had been going through a little bit of a tough time. My dad had been in a very bad car accident 6 or 8 months prior to that. So he was still going through rehabilitation processes for brain trauma and things like that. And so I had taken over a lot of his responsibilities and duties of managing the whole operation and our business pretty recently. So this was a big task to take on and manage. So we were shocked and confused. It's probably the biggest thing that we just had no clue what this was, where it was coming from, and why no one had contacted us personally just to sit down around a table and have a discussion about what they thought they were seeing, rather than going through some legal channel with attorneys to go about this.
I remember when we first heard about it, and I think you spent some time with Paul, kind of going through it. I think it's important to point out that the dairy had never had a violation. You were operating within all of your permits, that this was really sounds like out of the blue.
Yeah, that's correct. So we were in good standing with all of our regulatory agencies that oversee us for our environmental regulations, as far as farming and dairy and nutrient management planning and all of that. So that, again, that adds to the confusion of why we were being approached when it's not like we had some recent issue of, a violation of some sort with the regulatory agency. So we were in compliance and in good standing with them.
Yeah, and I think that, and we'll kind of loop this all back in together with some of the current issues that are facing a lot of dairies throughout the state, unfortunately. But one of the, I think when we turned it over to Paul, and I'll give the mic over to you, Paul, just kind of broadly summarizing the positions of the wells and the alleged water quality violations. Maybe you can, just from your perspective, go through why this was completely non-science based.
Yeah, I was kind of reviewing some of those documents that we had looked at a few years ago, and yesterday, and it hit me again. Some of the same things, and I was discussing this with Anya. So, the memory of the nitrate levels in the city's wells, what they were claiming those were, and then monitoring wells on the property where the city has its wells, and the dairy's irrigation well that it has between the dairy and the city's municipal wells. And I remember there was one well in particular, and I remember Ben bringing this up at the time. He was completely blown away because the dairy has an irrigation well completed to the same depth as the city's wells that had a nitrate reading of 2 milligrams per liter, and the drinking water standard is 10. And so, and it's only a little over 100 yards from the city's wells. That's just, it doesn't add up when you look at that. You claim the dairy is the impact, yet the dairy has a well on its property completed at the same depth. It's got, a reading of 2, and the city is looking at, numbers that are many times over the water quality limits. Then later we learned there were issues with the city's wells, like, construction issues, or, they were falling apart, the age issues. And so there was more than just nitrate in the groundwater types of issues. Again, also I mentioned, the city put in monitoring wells between the dairy and the city's wells. And many times those monitoring wells showed lower results than the city's domestic or the municipal wells that they were pumping from and claiming had very high nitrate. And that's just not how, nitrate flows, or how you would paint a, contamination line of, from the dairy to the city's wells. There was some things that definitely didn't add up from a science perspective on, the city's arguments that, the dairy must be the culprit here. The science certainly didn't point in that direction.
So given that the city was overwhelmingly, they lacked evidence from the word go, it always appeared that this litigation was the product of an out-of-town law firm that was heavily motivated, I think, both politically and just, with their current client roster to try to come after just something that was easy prey. And it was always our impression that law firm had extracted a significant sum of money from the city, and it became kind of if we admit that we had no standing and no cause, we will have spent X amount of dollars on this out-of-town law firm that claimed they could extort a bunch of money out of you. Is that an accurate summary of how and why things got so hard? Yeah.
Yes, to a point. So I guess we were always wondering kind of where this was coming from. We could never get to the bottom of who was driving this, who was pushing this, because in a small local farming community, you would expect, when you know these people, we have relatives in the town, we do business with everyone there, we've been there for 100 years, you would expect that you can have a face-to-face human conversation about what's going on, but we were never able to have that. So we did have that feeling that their counsel that represented them was not allowing them to have that line of communication with us. And so we always had to try to go through other channels or be creative with trying to figure out how to discuss things with them, because we could never just have a discussion without the attorneys in the room for about 6 years. And then, and my lingering question in the back of my head always was, do they have some evidence that they are not showing us, that they are not presenting to us, that's some ace in the hole that they would use in court against us to incriminate us? And finally, it took years to get it out that no, they didn't have that. And they were going to rely on spending the taxpayer dollars of the city of Corcoran out of the water fund, which is funded by the local taxpayers, to try to get that evidence through the court. So it did give me a huge sense of relief and peace for myself that I did finally know that they didn't have any evidence to incriminate us. They were purely basing this off of speculation, which is, you could also call it a form of extortion. So it was making claims without having valid evidence to back them up. And they had not done the technical studies. They had not enlisted their, a hydrologist to do a fate and transport model of nitrate movement in the area. They had not done any of those things. And they were just basing all of this on the threat and the speculation that we were the closest dairy facility in the area. So if there are nitrates in the water, it must be from them. So yeah, there were issues with their council from out of town and local council, both contributing to that problem of not being able to communicate with either locally elected officials or staff there at the city. So that was a big challenge of just causing a lot of not friendly interaction and communications.
So on that note, I think, and again, some of this is just us repeating history, because a lot of dairy families really cared about you and your dad and just the struggle that this presented. If a local municipality can essentially allege any kind of pollution and or contamination because a dairy exists next to it really proved, and still is proving, by the way, to be a broader statewide threat. But maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the inter-industry dynamics. And I remember so many dairies and their supporters showed up for you at a city council meeting. And it was, I'm not going to say it was fun, but it's certainly, I think, shown a light on an issue for the city council that they were either blissfully unaware of how contentious things were, or they were not aware of their out of control city manager and council.
Right. Yeah. So on that last point about what their awareness, it's hard to know. It's hard to tell because they wouldn't talk to us about it. But yeah, I mean, I would say inter-industry dynamics are, that was an interesting road too, and kind of windy paths, so there are some consultants out there that have good relationships with a lot of different industry allies and even regulatory relationships and resources, so we were able to take advantage of some of those as far as trying to open lines of communication and bring this more into the realm of discussion with like the Regional Water Quality Control Board and things like that. So that was beneficial. But on the flip side, I would also caution people to make sure, just like you hire any legal counsel and they have to run a list of any possible conflicts of interest. Maybe there's a different term for it that they use.
That's right. That's right. A conflict.
I would also urge everyone to do that with any consultant that they use also in this situation, and just be very careful about what other people may have a benefit in pushing you to settle one way or the other. Always take into account if there's a benefit for a certain industry, a certain organization, for your family, and weigh all of those options just prudently, because no one cares about your family and your business more than you do. So always keep that in the forefront of your mind. So yeah, I mean, having a resource like Western United Dairies was amazing to bring local support together when we finally kind of did bring this into the public light a lot more a few years down the road. And for us, that just emotionally and morally really lifted my family up a lot. We're forever grateful for that, because I think emotionally that was the turning point, that we didn't feel like we were battling this alone. And we had open public support from our local community and from the dairy industry and the farming industry and, Tulare County Farm Bureau also. So those, even if the city council didn't want to listen to anything we were saying in those meetings, they still heard. And I hope that shows that within these local farming communities, we will stick together, and people do care about their neighbors and care about each other and how this impacts the broader industry. So yeah, don't try not to be isolated or feel isolated, and find those good people that can help you.
It's really well said. Yeah, I have a conflict jihad too. For anybody that ever wants to know that information, the consultant, whether they're an attorney or otherwise, are legally required to disclose their conflicts to you, to their clients. And you are always entitled to ask for those disclosures. it does become an issue, and there's only a handful of ag consultants, there's only a handful of ag attorneys, and there's only a handful of water consultants. And so it's really critical that if you enter these arenas, you know where the bread is buttered, because someone's usually got a bigger butter pad than you. So I think that, but you did it really, you were very diplomatic there. I think that, and it's been our pleasure. We still have hundreds of support community over litigation T-shirts if anybody ever wants one. But it was actually it was a heartwarming thing to be able to engage in, and just seeing the hall out in Corcoran filled with angry dairy farmers. There was something, I think, really lightening about that. And watching you. We still have video of you on our website giving your impassioned speech before the city council. That it's just, we really can make a difference when we stick together. So I think that, and that's, we were happy to do that. And thank you to all of our members for showing up and helping support the issue, either monetarily or just with your presence. All those things are really important. But a couple other things that I wanted to touch on while we have you here, because Paul and I are going to bring it home with some of the current issues that unfortunately your litigation at Western accurately predicted that this was a frivolous lawsuit that was going to set the blueprint for many other lawsuits that have in fact started to make their way through the chain and are continuing to plague the California dairy industry. But I would point out so much of at least from my seat, the daily litigation research was kind of a full-time job for you. And I think that there were a lot of really talented attorneys that you did end up working with, but had you not done this as part of your full-time third or fourth job, being a mother, a wife, and a dairy manager, I don't know that most people could have handled the amount of legal stress that you had to go through. So I think that maybe you could talk a little bit about your day-to-day management of the lawsuit. Just again, it's really important that people hear your story so they know what maybe could come their way.
Sure. So I think one of the big benefits was the attorney we did retain was very open and willing to let me review a lot of the documents that we requested or demanded from when we would get something like a Public Records Act request or some documents in through the court system, from the city or the regulatory agencies. He was willing to let me comb through a lot of those to save on legal costs. So I can't say it strongly enough that you have to find an attorney that fits your personality and works well with you. Because that was a huge benefit to me that he was willing to do that. So, it was.
Can you say his name?
Do you want me to say his name?
Yeah, go ahead. Say his name. He's a great guy.
Peter Shao, he's at King and Spalding down in Southern California. So, the process we went through was, Dairy Cares was helpful in that process. They sent us a list of different law firms that specialized in RCRA or some form of this environmental law. And then we went through and interviewed each of those firms, put forth someone their attorney that specializes in this area. And then we went through and interviewed each of those attorneys to see who we liked the best and who might be a good fit for us. And Peter made the cut. And I have to say, he's a strategizer and he was willing to have phone calls with me at 8:00 at night after I put children to bed and like I said, saved a lot on the cost side from me going through, and he would tell me what to look for in documents and things. So
he put up with my nonsense. I remember that. He was very helpful at helping guide us to the most productive PR relationship.
Yeah, he's not just a legal analyzer, he's a strategizer too, right? That's why you pay him the big bucks. So But I mean, find an attorney that and ask them up front to give you an estimate of the phases of this, right? So initially you might be in just a discussion settlement phase of, can we settle this, or can we get out of, like, just to talk, right? And then if you do have to move into the court time frame, what does that look like? So ask them. Every single attorney should be able to give someone a cost estimate of what this would cost them. If they're experienced, then they should be able to do that. And then you can better make decisions about your financials and your lifestyle of what your business looks like to be able to take on or not, So, and then you have to weigh that. And if you are willing to settle, what that potentially looks like, what they're asking or demanding of you. So all of those things are really important, especially if the other party, the accusing party, won't talk to you. Then you have to go through your attorney. So I would say I also was very persistent in that I wanted to be included in all communications regarding our business and this lawsuit. So Peter was very, very good about that, whether it's to a consultant or other attorneys or someone else. Emails, make sure you're involved in conference calls. Like I said, no one cares, and it's not as important to them ever as it's going to be to you, because you're the one being held up to this. So don't ever let someone make you feel like you should not be on a phone call for some reason or another, or you should not be privy to some conversation or knowledge. That is not the case, because they're not the ones on the hook. It's always going to be you. So just be forceful about that is one thing I would recommend. And people know I'm forceful about things. So
well, I think this is a really good way to summarize. Just be prepared to fight, and be actively engaged in your own litigation. Treat it like another aspect of your business. And you come out on the other side okay.
Yeah, and if someone doesn't have the energy or the resources to put into all of that, then they probably need to think about how they can try to, if there's, try to either come to a settlement agreement or get some other party involved, like possibly the Regional Water Quality Control Board or whatever the regulatory agency might be, to try to help facilitate those discussions. I know
how did those go for you?
The opposite instinctive reaction of every dairyman is to not get a regulatory agency involved. And maybe that's different with different offices here, but our Fresno office, they were actually very reasonable to work with, and they tried, I felt pretty earnestly to spur a discussion to have a collaborative effort in figuring out a long-term solution, and the city just would not accept it. It was really sad to watch, actually. So yeah, the water board, if you have a decent relationship with someone there, or and Paul knows everyone probably at all the regulatory agencies, so a line of communication there to just see if someone will approach this in a common sense way.
I think that's a really good segue into some of the issues that we're seeing now. One of the things that Corcoran made kind of a staple, and it's become more and more of a commonplace reaction, is there's no seeking resolution with some of these frivolous lawsuits. They want to eliminate you because you're a dairy. And we're starting to see this pop up all over the North Coast. And the common theme is there's not a resolution. There's not an attempt to mediate. There is not an attempt to accept scientific facts. There is only the attempt to eliminate. And so one of the things that your lawsuit taught me is something that, Paul has reinforced with my time with Western repeatedly, which is, that these parties that are mobilized often by environmental justice communities do not want to see any kind of resolution with dairies, whether it's air quality, water quality, methane. They want the issue to be eliminated. Never mind the jobs, never mind the fact that dairy consumption of products is up 400%. These are all things that don't that don't resonate. It's about scoring something on the scorecard to I guess get a broader funding donation for eliminating something that they don't like. But we're seeing
I'm sure it comes down to money. So I mean, it's not, I don't think it's too cliche to say it's the root of all evils, but it really is. And that's what it was all just about money with this. It wasn't about us needing to line any lagoons or anything like that. It was purely about dollars. That's what it was, money.
Well, and it was always, and again, I'm going to offer a opinion from my chair. It looked like a bait and switch where they had squandered remediation funds for their water quality well replacements, and they were seeking out of the water fund to try to backfill that with extortion. Right. But what we see is this extortive behavior, whether it's to backfill a funding issue somewhere. These type of habitual lawsuits continue to grow, and the science is never there.
Right.
But to your point, there are many dairy families who are not looking forward to the slog of an 8-year, highly managed litigation, and so it's exhausting.
Yeah.
But how do you and your family feel now that it's over? I mean, I don't know what we learned here.
I almost don't believe it still because it's still really fresh. So I'm thinking something is going to come back. It's not really true. So,
I don't know.
No, I mean, I can't say I'm happy because, the happiest outcome for me would have been the city coming to us and saying, we were all wrong. And, we've just dropped the lawsuit and here's a check for reimbursement of all the money you had to spend to fight this. No, but I mean, I do feel good about where we settled. So we put resources into water infrastructure for the city and residents of the city of Corcoran. So rather than just a blank check going into a black hole, which is what they demanded for 6 years, was absolutely not. I was not going to do that. I don't know if it was possibly lining someone's pockets or what that money would be used for, reckless spending, who knows, right? So I am much more comfortable. And in the settlement agreement, it was something that was offered probably 3 years prior when we actually had other landowners involved through the Regional Water Quality Control Board to try to help collaborate on something. And they threw it across the table, said, no way, we're not accepting this, laughed in our faces. And everything started to kind of fall apart at that point. And this, since they had an interim city manager, that's who we kind of resurrected the similar offer. And he accepted that for us to help with infrastructure. So it was something we could do. It was all we could take on from a financial perspective. And then I felt good about it, knowing that it was going to be used directly for the citizens in the water system there, rather than just a check going over to who knows what. So yeah, I do have a question about the North Coast. Are they seeing who's the
aggressor?
Yeah, in those situations.
There's a number of aggressors. We have, the Coastal Commission is kind of in the corner. In Point Reyes, we have the National Park Service, which is actually being sued by the Center for Biological Diversity for having existing leases to dairies and beef operations on the point. So that's fun. And then, unfortunately, we've seen a rise in both private litigation against our members on the water quality side, and there is an increase in, scrutiny over NPDES permits. So they're all related to water quality, including what's happening out on Point Reyes. And so instead of one municipal enemy here, we have a combination of federal government they're all stemming, I think, from private litigation. So the Center for Biological Diversity is well represented by several law firms, unfortunately. So, and then the other dairy farmer that was recently sued was also, that was a straight extortion, and he couldn't afford the length of time for the litigation, which is, it's awful. It's
Yeah. I mean,
really,
and that's
really awful.
they file these lawsuits knowing that, with that intention that you won't have the stamina to withstand going through all of the court and battle and all of that. So everyone initially encourages everyone to, well, how much can you settle for, or pushes you in that way so strongly. And it's like, wait a minute, what if we want to fight? Right? Like, is that an option here? Because there were quite a few people pushing us in a settlement direction. It's like, but we have zero evidence to show we've done anything, so it is so sad to hear that, because it's really frustrating that our justice system is propping that up at this point. And that shouldn't be what the basis of the United States of America is founded on. So it's really sad to hear that.
Yeah, it seems to be increasing every single day. We hear a little bit more, but I did want to make sure we got Paul on one more time to offer, and this unfortunately would not have been a solution in your case, but I think, Paul, it's really important for you to say what you want to say about trying to prevent some of this.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of as a message for the rest of our listeners, you're listening, and this dairy went through this situation, and you're not in this situation, and that's great. But nitrate is becoming a bigger issue, and part of this could have ended very differently had the dairy not been in compliance with all of their issues. If there was a smoking gun, if there was a significant problem, this could have ended very differently for this dairy. Unfortunately, they were dragged through 8 years of this litigation with nothing wrong. But I just hate to think of what if there was a problem. And so every individual dairyman, my message would be, your nutrient management plan is your friend. Understand it, follow it, comply with it. If something like this happens, that's your defense. And so, yep, I just hate to think of what would have happened if they would have, started digging and found a major problem at the dairy. Then, here's your smoking gun. We've got this. And so, for every dairyman out there that's listening, understand your regulations and comply with them. I know they can be a burden, but in this case, I think they can really help you. And I think they help you guys out, that you could, and we talked as we were going through this, and you had a water board inspection, and the water board was involved, and, most other people were on your side, because when you looked at the evidence, it just wasn't there against you. And so I would just, like to really tell our members, this is important. There's more coming. We kind of talked about some other lawsuits that are coming, and other members that are involved in these types of things. It is important to understand your regulations and comply with them to give you the best strength possible. So it may not stop a lawsuit from being filed, but when you get into digging for evidence, and there is no evidence because you've done your part, you've done a good job, I think it puts you in a position of strength.
Absolutely. You're right, Paul. So we were, that's literally what our regional water quality control board said, was they had no reason to come after our facility because we were in compliance. So it's so true. That is a huge part of your defense if you choose to fight. And the court system will hold in high regard that regulatory agency's word, saying that, well, we had no reason to issue them a violation. We had no reason to issue some sort of order of correction, because they were in compliance with the written rules. So it is extremely important in that regard.
Yeah, if that agency, the water quality agency, had not been on your side, that would have been terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably would have gotten really ugly.
Yeah. So that was the message that I wanted to bring, just for, we're hearing a story of somebody and what they went through. But here's a nugget that you can take, for your operation, your dairy, your family, that could potentially help you, stave off, something like this, or at least be in a good position to defend yourself.
Right.
Well, I think that, I mean, for what it's worth, Tessa, I mean, bad bitch to bad bitch. I'm really proud of you and your family for sticking through this. I'm really proud that you thought from the beginning, I'm not going to settle this. Because so this is, I think the good news is your settlement, once it's more public, will be the blueprint for people like Western, people like us, when we're trying to help these dairies. We will turn to that. And conversely, a settlement recognizing perhaps wrongdoing, which was what a lot of people were advising you to do 8 years ago, would have also been cataclysmic. And it's why Western was there for you, and really proud that your family decided to fight, because not everybody does. But a settlement the other direction would have set a precedent for every dairy farm in California that a municipal can then sue them for alleged anything, insert violation. And so we're really happy to stand with you. And I'm so proud that that I met you, and, just watching your fighting spirit. We can't say thank you enough, because your fighting spirit, whether people ever want to admit it or acknowledge it or not, just saved hundreds of the biggest dairies in the state, because you decided to stick up for what you knew was true and accurate and right. And part of it is that you were following all your water quality documents.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, part of it was our pride, right? We had felt we didn't deserve what we were being handed. But I mean, the other flip side of that was we constantly were thinking about what precedent this was set for the industry. And everyone does need to consider that. I mean, do what you need to do, what is best for you to survive and your family. But also think about if this is going to impact the next generation of your kids or grandkids, if they're still farming around, and not even just dairy, but other farming as well, being brought into this. So, yeah. And for those that, are faithful people, I would encourage a lot of prayer. And I had to continually tell myself that God put this on my plate for a reason. He gave it to me because he knew I could handle it. So that's the reality. That's the truth. And that helps get people through a lot. So
we had some very strong board personalities that both publicly and privately said they cannot settle. Please God, they cannot, because they knew, I mean, the insurance ramifications, everything down the line would have had huge implications. And so I hope people stop and thank you and give you prayers and hugs, because you certainly deserve that. But yeah, I thank you so much for choosing to fight.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys bringing light to everything, because I think that's so helpful too, is people not feeling isolated and knowing that there are great helpful organizations like Western out there, and just good people that care, so.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, let's hopefully chat again on more fun circumstances, but for what it's worth, I'm very happy that it's behind you. Let us know if anything comes out of the woodwork, but I think on this issue, the case is closed.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you guys. Nice to see you.
Thank you to those three for coming on, and thank you to those who are listening. If you would like a notification when a new episode releases, you could subscribe to the podcast. Have a good week.
Are you tired of hearing that the main way to save water is fallowing? Are you tired of seeing articles about how alfalfa and corn waste water? At Common Good Water, we combine the best-in-class subsurface drip system and precision crop management services, including pest control. Our verification program qualifies for public funding, and we want to help you continue farming in California. Contact your groundwater sustainability agency and ask how you can work with Common Good Water. Visit commongoodwater.com.
Did you know that you can turn your dairy manure into cash? Bennett Environmental is offering above-ground dairy digesters at no cost to you. These systems can also remove nitrates from your lagoons to help you comply with water board regulations. Our proven above-ground technology will generate income for your dairy into the foreseeable future. Because we truck the renewable natural gas off-site, your dairy can profit regardless of your location. Bennett Environmental, turning your wastewater liabilities into sustainable assets. Learn more at bennett-environmental.com.
Thank you to the Western United Dairies generous business sponsors, the Morning Star Company, Holt of California, Farm Credit Alliance, PG&E, Arata, Swingle, Van Egmond and Goodwin Law Offices, Yosemite Farm Credit, F&R Ag Services, Moss Energy Works, California Dairy Magazine, Bennett Environmental, and Common Good Water. We appreciate our sponsors and thank them for their continued support. While Western United Dairies respects the varied views of our guests, please note that the opinions expressed in the Seen and Heard podcast may not necessarily reflect the positions of the Western United Dairies Board of Directors or our sponsors. If you would like more information on how to sponsor Western United Dairies or this podcast, please send us an email at info@wudairies.com.